Hi, welcome to my video. Hey, it's been a while, eh? I hadn't, I haven't been making videos for a while, and when I come back, you see me on Windows 11. You're probably thinking, "What the hell, dude? Why are you back on Windows? Why have you not been making Linux videos for a while now?" Well, I never said I was a particular, you know, operating system fanboy. Okay, I like every operating system out there. To be honest, my favorite operating system is Mac OS. I like Mac OS probably the best out of everything else. I do like Darwin. I like the BSD. I like the free BSD. I just like the BSD Unix a lot. But unfortunately, BSD is not as good when it comes to Linux, when it comes to Steam gaming and applications like Discord and Steam in general. It doesn't have support on FreeBSD, though it does have support on macOS. But the gaming experience is actually worse than it is on Linux. It used to be the opposite, but at least I could run Final Fantasy 14 on Mac, so that's the only game I play anyway. So I like macOS a lot, though. Just I think it's a good system, but I like Windows as well. I'm not a hater against Windows. Just because I use Linux, it doesn't mean I have to hate Windows. I don't hate operating systems. I do get mad at Windows a lot. I am not happy with a lot of things that's being integrated into Windows, and I don't like a lot of the things. But I will say one thing: Windows does not update that often. Yes, what really annoys me a lot with Linux, and I know people are going to say, well, just use Debian stable. You won't get all these updates like you do with other distributions. Use Debian stable. I don't like using old software. I'm sorry. I like to use the latest and greatest software. Now, you don't need to have a system updated every freaking day, every week, every second day, every third day, and you gotta reboot kernel updates often, so often. If you're on Fedora, you're on Arch Linux, probably the only system that doesn't update that much is probably Gentoo Stable. If you don't go on the roll and release part of Gentoo, because you can switch it up to that. Same as NixOS. One thing I like about NixOS though is that you can set up an automatic update. It'll update your system when it's ready to update, and it'll reboot your system so you could be gone to work, and if you have an update, it will update your system and reboot it. You can set that up in the configuration file, which I really love about NixOS. I would say that is probably the best feature I ever seen in Linux ever. Like that to me, like NixOS right there makes me love NixOS a lot just for that feature right there. I love setting up a system in a configuration file. I think that is brilliant. The downfall of NixOS though, there was all the downfalls on every distribution. Like there's some really good innovation in a lot of distributions, and there's a lot of good innovation in Linux in general. Okay, I love a lot of the technology in Linux. I actually love Linux a lot, but here I am making a video. I am using only Windows. I'm not using Linux. I am very pissed off at Linux. And the reason why I'm pissed off at Linux is because every freaking person that uses Linux are like in another dimension. Like seriously, like I know people love Linux and they want it to be good. They try to just what they use they think is great, and everybody should use it because they have a good experience with it. But everybody's different. A lot of the average users in computers, they're not really smart people. Like I'm not trying to say this to put down anybody, but a lot of your Walmart average people, okay, they buy a computer, it comes with Windows, they use that, okay. They use the Wi-Fi, they call it. You know, instead of using the internet, they use the Wi-Fi. They do their email, they do the web browsing, they do the TikTok, they do the YouTube, they do the Facebook, or the Reddit, or whatever the Twitter, wherever they use, they do that. Now, to get to use Linux is probably why it's in the 3% or 4% people use Linux. Now, Linux is a lot more popular than it used to be. When I first started using Linux back in the late 90s and early 2000s, not much people used Linux. There was actually weren't much tech support. There weren't much YouTube channels because YouTube didn't even existed back then. And to really learn Linux is basically burn a CD and you're on your own. You learn as you mess up. And believe me, I mess up a lot. I went through a lot with Linux. I went through a long journey with Linux. Some good adventures, some really frustrating adventures with Linux. I went hell and back with Linux, man. I rice every single window manager you can think of. I done all the Talon window managers. I done, you know, the open box, the flux box, the black box. You know, I done all that stuff, man. I done the CWM, the TWM. I riced all that up. Did the MCWM and all the other sort of no border stacking window managers, Talon window managers, you name it, I done it. Awesome WM. I never was a big fan of i3. I know people like i3 a lot. I just never was a big fan of i3. I love Awesome a lot. I love DWM. I really love DWM a lot. I love the simplicity of DWM. I love the C language of DWM. I just like C language in general. I'm a big Unix guy. But anyways, why am I back on Windows? Well, first of all, I really love Fedora 41. I was using Fedora 41. I know my last video I was on Arch Linux. The reason why I actually left Arch Linux and I went to Fedora 41, and actually it's a very good operating. I have no issues. Like, it works really good. It runs games. Well, I wouldn't play Final Fantasy 14, but it ran that pretty good. I had no problems. The only one problem that I had with Fedora 41 is when I go to my lock screen and when I go back to the desktop, my window box of my Final Fantasy 14 would be small. And then I would have to reconfigure it inside the game to put it back to the original screen size. Now, I use full screen borderless window box. I don't use full screen. I use the full screen borderless because I prefer that when it comes to taking screenshots, especially on Linux. Have it in a borderless window box. To me, it's easier to take screenshots because sometimes you have it in full screen, it's hard to take screenshots, and it's just make things like you could have applications overlap on top something that's borderless window box, but when you have something full screen, it's hard to have an application on top of that because it's full screen, it's taking up the whole screen. That's why I like the borderless. And a lot of people, they use borderless full screen for that reason. Now, also I find Windows has better driver support. I gotta say though, NVIDIA driver support on Fedora 41 is really good, like awesome. You just go to the software store. Okay, the NVIDIA, the non-free NVIDIA drivers are right there. Like, Fedora 41 is a really good release. I gotta give it credit when credit is due, man. Fedora 41 is doing the right thing. Okay, GNOME Desktop is a really nice desktop. I really like the minimalistic of GNOME Desktop. The problem with GNOME, I complain about it a lot of times. There's no system tray. There's no good system tray on Linux whatsoever. It doesn't matter what desktop environment you use. Like, they'll say, oh well, KDE is good and they got everything works good. KDE, I don't know how people say they use KDE and not have any bugs. because I use KDE on 3 different types of computers, on 3 different types of graphic card. One's an Intel, one's an AMD, and the other one's an NVIDIA, and they all work buggy and some kind of problem I have with KDE desktop environment. I don't know. I ain't doing nothing fancy. I'm just using the system like I use Windows, like I use GNOME, and I have a lot of issues with KDE, especially when it comes to the lock screen. The lock screen is a big problem with me, for one thing. And copy and pasting the clipboard thing on KDE, it's completely broken for me. Like, it doesn't work properly. As to GNOME, all that works pretty good. The problem with GNOME is missing features. GNOME 2 had more features than GNOME 4 has, or 41, or what version? 47. GNOME 4. I call it 4 because there were 3. Now there's 4. Okay, GNOME 4. Okay, it's GNOME 4. Anyways, I know people get mad about it, but I call it GNOME 4. Okay, it's GNOME 4. You know, the recent GNOME is missing a lot of features. It's missing system tray. It's missing desktop icons. I know people are like, I don't care about desktop icons. I do. Okay, I use Windows all my life, and Windows always had desktop icons. Mac OS used desktop icons. All the systems I use besides, that's not Linux, all have desktop icons, okay, and all have system trays. Now, KDE does a lot of nice things. You can customize it a lot. I like that. Like, a lot of people like KDE for that reason, but a lot of people don't want to mention that it's really buggy because they like the customization of KDE and they like KDE a lot. So they don't want to make it, they don't want to say bad things about it. The problem with Linux users is that they don't say anything bad about Linux. They deal with it. They fix it. They troubleshoot it. They tinker. And I do this a lot myself. Like, I'm gonna be honest. Okay, I love Linux. I want it to be good, but if I'm gonna pretend that there's nothing wrong with Linux and there's no one's gotta call it out, it'll never, like, in my mind, it'll never get improved. Okay? You have to say Linux sucks, because it does. Linux sucks today. In 2024, I find Linux sucks big time. It is the most crappiest operating system out there. Like, if you want to compare what is a better operating system, Mac OS is probably the best operating system out there. It's probably the most secure, the most stable, the most less updated system. That it doesn't really have much update. It rolls out. Windows does this really good too. They roll out updates, like big major updates, once or twice a year, and they have little small ones every few months. Okay, and it doesn't update that often. Linux, back in the day, like, Linux didn't have all these updates. We used to make fun of Windows a lot because Windows would always have constantly updates and always restart your system all the time. Now Linux is doing this. Windows figured it out. Like, Windows figured it out. They're like, yeah, true. The Linux people were making fun of us about all these updates, so we're gonna fix it. So they did fix it. Windows doesn't update that much, and it doesn't restart your system that much. So I can keep my computer on for a long time, and it's good. As a Linux, it updates a lot, especially roll and release. But even if it's not roll and release, it updates a lot. It updates way too much. And that's, to me, is the biggest annoying thing. It's like, when I use Linux, I come back from work and like, oh, Fedora has updates. I gotta reboot the system. Because you have to reboot it. You should reboot it. It doesn't matter if it's small little updates. You just reboot your system just because you want it to all work properly. If you have updates and you never reboot your system, what's the point of the update, right? Because a lot of the updates are systemd or the kernel or some sort of driver update in the kernel or some firmware needs to be updated. You know what I mean? so a lot of it has to be rebooted to actually install it, and to reload the reload, you know, just reload everything, like all the kernel, I don't know what you call it on Linux, modules, the kernel modules. There you go, and on Kex for Mac OS. Basically, the drivers, like the kernel drivers, modules, all the stuff that the Linux kernel provides, because that's the core part of the system, right? And same as Windows, it has this as well. Mac OS has this as well with XNU. Okay. I find Wayland is getting better, but it's still really buggy as hell. I find that desktop for Linux, all of them suck. Okay, KDE has probably the best interface, the best customization, but it's quite bloated. People will they thumb down my subreddit when I say KDE's bloated. It is bloated. Look at GNOME. GNOME is so minimalistic. Man, I love it. I love the minimal of GNOME. It's awesome. Okay, you can compile GNOME without having Xorg support. You can just have Xwayland and it being a full Wayland desktop environment. That's awesome. That is awesome, and it doesn't have all this bloat like KDE. KDE has a lot of programs, okay, and a lot of programs that most people don't even use. You don't even have to install it. What's really weird is that it'll install a lot of these applications that you don't use, but the most important applications that people do use, Dolphin and Dolphin, which is the file manager, and Console, which is the terminal, you have to install it separately, pretty much in every distribution. It doesn't install, like when you install KDE, it doesn't install your terminal and your file manager. So that's kind of weird, I find. GNOME, on the other hand, it installs Nautilus or files, and it does have its own terminal. It installs that as well. That's one thing I like about GNOME. You install GNOME, it installs all it installs the whole desktop environment, which is really nice. I find KDE is split up a lot. It's you can do a minimal installation, you can do a full installation. KDE was a good desktop environment, but I'm gonna say it, man. Maybe I'm just old school. Maybe I'm just old in general. But the K desktop 1 to 3 was the best KDE ever. Since they went to Plasma on version 4, that's when I really stopped using KDE. Plasma really screwed up KDE. My personal opinion, it really, it's still pretty buggy. But I gotta say, KDE 6 is an improvement from 5. But it's still pretty buggy. Same as GNOME. GNOME is really stable, but it's buggy as well. Wayland's buggy. I'm just tired of updates. Like, that is the biggest problem with me. I come home, I get updates, I gotta restart my computer, and it's just it just comes to a point like I hate to just unlock my computer and then go to my game and it's like in a small window box. I gotta always readjust the screen size. It's just little things like that. It just really irritates me because Linux shouldn't be like this. Linux should be just as good as Mac OS and Windows, if not on the same level. It's been around as long as all these other systems. Actually, Linux been around, even the desktop of Linux, been around longer than Mac OS. Think about that. OS X only been out in the 2000s. Linux been around at a desktop in the late 90s, even probably like mid 90s. Probably wasn't the best, but it still had a desktop. It had a GUI. It was an operating system. It had a desktop. It's been around for a while, longer than OS X. And OS X, you look at it now, it is very awesome. OS X is really great. Well, it's called Mac OS now, but it's still the same system, right? And it's a really good system. It's actually my favorite system. My favorite, like, if I'm gonna say what is my favorite operating system, it is Mac OS. Why I like Mac OS? Because it's BSD based. BSD is awesome. I like BSD a lot better than Linux, and I always have it. I do talk about Linux. I use Linux a lot longer than any other operating system out there. I love Linux, but I really love BSD. And the reason why I like BSD is because it is the true Unix. It is actually very solid, very stable, has great POSIX. It's just a great system. I love Darwin. I'm a big fan of NextStep. I'm a big fan of Open Darwin, Open Step, NextStep, Pure Darwin. I love all this stuff. I love Darwin. Darwin is one of my favorite Unix systems. I love BSD. I love FreeBSD. I would personally use FreeBSD full time if it had Discord support, if it had Steam support, if you can play games like you can play on Linux on FreeBSD. I know that there's ways you could do it, but if you can play it like how you could play it on Linux on FreeBSD, then I would be like, sure, yeah, hey, I would use just FreeBSD. I wouldn't even use Windows. I would use FreeBSD. If I could run Discord and play Steam games like I could do with Linux, I would use FreeBSD. Like, that's all we use. That's all I would use. One thing I like about Windows is that it's really good for creative people. It has all the software you need to use for to do things like for photo editing, to video editing, to audio stuff. You know what I mean? Like Windows and Mac OS, especially Mac OS, is very good for that. But Windows has software, and it's good for that as well. Both of them are really good for that. But Linux, they do have software. They have a lot of like alternative, open source software, but they're not as good. Like GIMP is nothing like Photoshop. Photoshop is a lot better than GIMP will ever be. I love GIMP personally. GIMP is actually something I use a lot, and I use that over Photoshop. But I love GIMP. GIMP is actually what got me into. GIMP is actually what introduced me to open source software. GIMP back in 96, 97. It was the first software that I learned what GNU and open source was. Free software and open source software. And open all that, like Netscape or Mozilla was another system that introduced me to open source. And then I started looking into Linux. I remember people used to talk about Linux back in the mid 90s. I was probably like 13 years old. Yeah, I was 13 in 1995. I remember somebody, another nerd guy that I used to go to school with, mentioned this thing called Linux. They say it's like DOS, but it's not like DOS. It's like Unix. I know what Unix was, but I never used it. But I heard about it. We learned in school, right? The whole Unix stuff. We learned about that in school. We actually didn't even learn about BSD and VMS. But anyways. So annoying. Because I have ASUS products and like this program, that ASUS program, and knows like, oh, you got an ASUS AMD card, you got an ASUS motherboard, you like register it. I'm not gonna fucking register it. But that's one thing I like about Windows though. It does have the great software. It has good audio. It has good. It just everything works really well. Like my hardware works better. It just sounds like the sound, like speakers, they just sound better. When I watch video, I have to put my volume a lot lower because like I'm getting like my Dolby Digital sound. I'm getting like It's a really good sound that I'm not getting from Linux. I get sound from Linux, but I don't get that good quality sound that I'm getting on Windows. Same as my little mini PC that I bought. My God, I have a THX speakers. I had to put that right down to like volume 15. Like I had it before, but it was like way up past 50 on Linux, and I had to put it down really low because it just sounds so much louder and so much better. Like the quality of the sound is just way better. Maybe it's just the codecs that it uses. Like Linux probably use a lot of like open source codecs that just not as high as quality as what you get with Windows and Mac OS. I just noticed like the sound quality is a lot better on Windows. Another thing, if you have a high refresh rate monitor, I find it works a lot better on Windows than it does on Linux. Like my game Final Fantasy 14, it looks better. It has better refresh rate, even though I hadn't changed nothing. I use the same thing I use in Linux, and I use it on Windows, and I noticed like the frame rate, it's a lot better on Windows. It just games work a lot better, especially if you have a high refresh rate monitor. It just works better on Windows. Yes, Windows has all the support. Windows has a lot of support, right? But Linux can be better. But people say, "Oh, it's good, it's great, Linux is the best. Everybody should use Linux. There should be more people using Linux." Well, maybe Linux should be more improved. How about that? How about you be a little bit rough on Linux and start like, yeah, Windows is better than Linux, but Linux is still a good operating system. How about being like honest? It's true. I think Windows is a better operating system than Linux. It is. It has a lot more support for hardware. It has a lot more software on it. It has less updates. It updates a lot better than it does on Linux. Linux updates way too much and reboots your system way too much. I can't even use Arch Linux. I can't. I used to love Arch Linux, but when you have like 3 or 4 computers all using Linux, and they're all using Arch Linux, it's not fun. Maybe one computer with Arch Linux. Okay, good. But I have a lot of computers. I know a lot of people that use Arch Linux. They just have a laptop. They're a student. They're going to college, whatever. They have one computer and it's a laptop. And they like, I use Arch Linux, by the way. That's the only thing they use. So when they have updates, they just restart the computer and they're always on that computer. Me, I have one in the living room. I got 2 computers here, you know. I got one on the desk in the living room as well, which is a Mac. But I don't really use the Mac too much. I'm actually planning to buy the Mac Mini M4, the base model. Yeah, it's very tempting. I really like these little Mac Minis computers. I like the new Mac Mini that just came out. I'm very interested in getting one. I like Mac computer. I like Mac hardware. I'm a sucker for Apple stuff, but I'm not an Apple fanboy. Like I just think that their hardware is nice. I have some old iMac computers, and it's all made out of metal. It is heavy duty shit, man. Even my Mac Mini that I have, it's all made out of metal. I love it. I have 2 Mac Minis. I have a 2012 Mac Mini and I have an M1 Mac Mini, and I want to get an M4. I just like Apple hardware. I think they look nice. Nice devices. They work good. I have a Pixel 8a. It has 120 hertz refresh rate, right? And it's pretty smooth. And it has the latest Android. My iPhone 14, which only has 60 hertz, I find the operating system iOS just runs so much smoother than Android. And I'm not saying Android runs bad. It's just I see, even though it's half the hertz, man. It's 60. It's not 120. It's 60, and it runs. It's like it just like iOS is so smooth. I gotta say, like it is smooth. It works really well. I never had any issues ever with any Apple product when it comes to their operating system. I never had any problems with it. Like I really never had any problems with Apple stuff. I'm gonna be straight up honest. Like I, even on Hackintosh, on running Mac OS on, well, has some problems, but that's because it's not running on native Apple hardware. But even so, I barely had any problems with it. Not like Linux, I have a lot of problems with it. Okay, I'm gonna be straight up. Like a lot of people, they don't want to admit that they have problems with Linux, but the reality is Linux sucks. Okay, Wayland sucks. X11's old. It should be that should have been ditched a long time ago. It's not even being maintained. It's probably some people are maintaining it a little bit, but it's something that it shouldn't exist on Linux because it does have a lot of vulnerability, and it's a very big security risk. People think racing all these X11 window managers and using them, and they think that it looks cool. Yeah, it looks cool, but you're running a computer that's very, very, very not secure. I'm gonna be honest. Like, use what you want to use. Personally, I don't use it. I don't really care what you guys gotta say to me and try to explain to me that it's secure to use it and blah blah blah. It's bullshit. What I'm want to say? No, it's not bullshit. I don't want to use X11. Okay, that is something that I think that if you're running that on your computer, you're running something that's very insecure. It is not secure at all. And I rather run Windows than running Linux with X11. Now I know FreeBSD uses X11, and so does OpenBSD and the BSDs in general. But the thing about their X11 is that they maintain it themselves. They have the code, they maintain it with their system. As to Linux, it's not really like that. I don't know. I think Wayland is good and is the future of Linux, but I think it needs a lot of work. I think desktop for Linux, none of it's good. They're all terrible. I think KDE is probably the best, but it's still pretty buggy. If KDE would just lay off they had a lot of features already. It has a lot of customization. I would just keep it the way it is, right? Work on making KDE very rock solid, stable. Okay, like cut some of the stuff off, man. Like KDE application. Get rid of that stuff. Get rid of some of the software. Like, keep just. What I want to see with KDE, I just want to see KDE comes with a terminal, a file manager, and a program editor. Like Kate's pretty good. That's it. Maybe a good a simple audio program. Have a good little calendar app. Maybe come with a calculator. Huh? A calculator? How about that? And that's it. And work on KDE being very stable, because KDE is a very nice desktop environment. I like KDE. I really do. It has you could make it. You can customize it to be like Mac OS. You can customize it to be like Windows, or you can customize it to be unique. Like KDE is awesome. It is very highly customizable. I love you can take the default theme and you could actually put a color scheme to it, like what you can do with your terminals. And that's cool. Windows is pretty cool too, because Windows is pretty cool too. Okay, I have nothing against Windows. The thing that I don't like about Windows is recall, all the AI stuff. But as long as it doesn't, as long as like the users can not have to use it, then it's cool. But I feel like it's gonna be forcing us, or I think recall might just be a flop. Like like Microsoft probably will just scrap it because I don't think anybody really likes recall, and I don't think anybody could really use it, to be honest. I think maybe it'll be probably good for people that like in a big business corporation. It'd probably be good for that, but like when it comes to like just regular Walmart users, Walmart average Walmart people. Why do I say that? Because Adam Gold says that it's kind of funny, which is kind of true. Just your average Walmart person, you know, they're not gonna really care about recall, and that's probably like 75% of your, customers. Microsoft, maybe more than that, and probably 50% of it will go to Linux if they're just not gonna like recall. Okay, they're not gonna use it. It's just we don't want this. I like Windows. I think Windows is a great operating system. I think it looks good. I know some people might say that Windows 11 is ugly. It has two personalities. Like it has like a legacy mode, which is very true. It does have that Windows 7 sort of XP and 7 kind of look to it. They're trying to hide that. This is where you can get all, like he even says here, like backup and restore Windows 7. So it's basically your Windows 7. Your control panel is your Windows 7. They need to fix this. They don't, because it's a lot of work. Like Windows has been around since 87. Windows 1 been around since 1987. I remember because I used it on IBM when I was like 5 years old. I remember on one of those old IBMs with the freaking yellow orange switch on the side. You flick it up, it had two 5.25 floppy disk. Those old IBM, I don't know what the name of it though. IBM. This is an IBM computer, 1987. I remember Windows 1.01. It was a blue freaking screen. It said IBM on it. Then it showed Windows 101. And yeah, it was very, very DOS looking. Same as Windows 2. Believe it or not, Talon Window Manager came from Windows 2, eh? People don't know it, but Talon came from Windows 2. Keep that in mind. A lot of things that are in Linux were all ideas from Windows over the years. But Windows has been around so long, they're not really copying them, but the ideas come from Windows. And Windows has been around, and I don't think Windows is a bad operating system. People like Linux people that like to complain about Windows because they have personal hatred toward it, and that's why they went to Linux in the first place. Me, I always use Windows. Even all these years when I use Linux, I always use Windows. I never had a problem with Windows. I would make fun of Windows once in a while, but I make fun of Linux myself. I make fun of Linux. I make fun of Mac OS sometimes. I make fun of operating systems. When an operating system pisses me off, I will fucking make fun of them. I don't care what operating system it is. I will make fun of Linux. I'll make fun of Windows. I'll make fun of Mac OS. If something's going shit, I will point it out and I will call it out. Because that's the way I look at it, the more you show the true colors of operating systems, the better. The developers, they hear that from people. They'll be like, oh, there's a problem? Let's fix it. The reason why Windows got better over the years is because a lot of people complain about Windows. And a lot of the Linux users that complain about Windows, developers are listening. They're like, oh, That's probably Microsoft put we love Linux because they call out the problems of Windows and they listen to that feedback. I'm sure they hear about it. I'm sure they hear some of it, you know what I mean? Because a lot of the YouTube videos, you'll see a lot of Linux videos and they put down Windows a lot. Just search it up. Search Windows. Like, is Windows 11 great? And they'll have all the videos about Linux. It's like the whole search would be all about Linux. Switching to Linux. Them complain about Windows. And that's developers, they're nerds like us, you know. They're geeks like us. And they're gonna be like, oh. So a lot of users don't like that, eh? Let's fix that. Let's make users like Windows. That's how they improve it. See, the thing about Linux, the users don't complain about Linux that often. They complain a little bit about it, but not enough. Here I am, I'm using Windows, and I ain't got to protest against it. Like, I am really fed up with Linux. I'm fed up with Wayland. I'm fed up with all their crappy desktop environments they have, because none of them are great. They're not. I like Windows because it has the desktop icons, has system tray, has a proper panel bar, which GNOME hides it in the activity menu, which is stupid. They should have it visible on the desktop. I like my desktop to be a desktop environment. Don't call it a desktop environment if it's not a desktop environment. I like to have a maximize, close, and minimize button. Even Mac OS has this. Why GNOME? Why only have a close button? Why I need to use tweaks to put back my GNOME, back how GNOME used to be? Because GNOME used to be like Windows. It had a maximize, a minimize, and close button. You used to have desktop icon. You used to have a system tray. GNOME 2 was so awesome. I wish that like GNOME team just like look back at GNOME 2 and be like, let's redo our shell. Let's do GNOME shell. Let's redo it. Let's bring back a lot of the classic features that people love GNOME 2. People love it so much that they made another desktop environment called Mate. Mate is basically GNOME 2. It's just people love GNOME 2. People love KDE 3. Okay? People love KDE 3. KDE team, GNOME team, look back at your legacy. Why people love it. It's not because, oh, it's shiny, it has a blur effect, or it's minimalistic, it's this and that and that and that. No. People like it because it had features that make sense. Because a lot of the people that are coming to Linux, you could be even a long-term Linux user, but before coming to Linux, we all were on Windows. We're all on Mac, or one or the other. And we're used to having all these core features. When you take it out, it's basically just, it's not making it better. It's just making the experience of your desktop just worse. GNOME works really good. I gotta say, GNOME 4 works really good. The problem with GNOME is that they try to, I don't know what they're trying to do. They're trying to make it desktop and tablet. They're trying to make it for touchscreen and mouse. And I think that you can't do universal. Microsoft try to do this. It's just not gonna work. Make a desktop a mouse, keyboard. Make it a desktop as a desktop. Make another interface for tablet. Have two separate things. Like Mac OS does this. Apple does this really well. They have iOS, iPad, and Mac OS. Smart. Very, very smart. But the applications within the desktop all works between things. That's what GNOME need to do. They need to make one for the tablets, one for the smartphone, and one for the desktop, and take all the applications and work together. An ecosystem. It sounds weird, but an ecosystem doesn't have to be, non-free. You could have an open source ecosystem as well. But that's what Linux needs: a nice, good ecosystem, nice consistency, and make things familiarized, because people like things to be familiarized. I love desktop icons. I don't know why. I just do. I used to like. One thing I like about Mac is that when you plug in a hard drive into your USB port, and it just shows that hard drive on your desktop. It's a little hard drive. It's mounted. You double click it, and it's there. You can check your files. I love that about Mac. I always love that about Mac. GNOME 2 used to have that. Just like Mac, they used to have, like, you plug it in. I remember I used like Ubuntu back in like the early 2000s, and you plug it into the drive, and it just showed the drive on the desktop, like what Mac OS did. It's just awesome. I love it so much. I love GNOME 2. So I miss GNOME 2. I know I just miss GNOME, the good old GNOME. I don't want to use Mate. I want to use GNOME. I like GNOME, but I miss GNOME being GNOME. It's sad because like GNOME was one of my favorite desktop environments, and just seeing the way it is today is just, I don't know. They're going backwards. They're not, like, it's supposed to be innovated. It's supposed to be improved, but it seems like it's just they're killing it. I don't know. It's hard to explain. But I'm still gonna be playing around with Linux in the future. I'm not because I'm on Windows doesn't mean that I'll probably be on Linux next month. I'm a person that just hops around different operating systems all the time. But I do like Windows, so I'm gonna lease some of my computers with Windows. But I will be playing around with Linux once again. This computer has a spare hard drive, so I'll probably check out some Linux distributions. But I really want to just make this video just to say, like, Linux needs to smarten up. It needs to, like, really focus on the desktop, because Linux needs to catch up with Mac OS and Windows. Because if Linux don't catch up with the desktop, like, yeah, it's all right nowadays, but in another 5 years, I would say, if Linux does not improve Wayland, does not prove or have a desktop environment that actually makes sense, I don't know. I can see Linux being a niche. It always will be a niche operating system. I want Linux to be the best. I want it to be above everything. I want it to be like, the outcast system, and just, climb up and be the best. Because Linux can be the best. But the Linux users, they don't point out the flaws of Linux, and they always think it's perfect. There's nothing wrong with Linux. So therefore, the developer's like, yeah, we're doing a good job. No, they're doing a bad job. Straight up. And I'm gonna use Windows until I see improvement with Linux. But right now, I don't see any improvements. Believe me, I'm testing out every single freaking desktop environment, every single distribution, or at least the ones I like to use, and I don't see any improvements. I mean, a little improvement, but I don't see, like, the desktop experience. I love KDE. I just wish that KDE would be very stable like GNOME. Then I would just use Linux. But it's pretty buggy. Anyways, guys, thanks for the watch. Have a good one. Cheers.